Good morning, everybody. It's Sunday. We are 3 days into masterclass, and I really enjoyed this talk today. It is all about how to put together what we've talked about the first 2 days into making better, more self-empowered choices in your life. You know, one of the things that really resonates for most people when I start talking to them about the Learn to Love Your Story model is that ultimately what I'm trying to do is empower you with the tools that you already have, just teaching you kind of some cheat sheets on how your own brain and nervous system work. And more than that, how to really step into your power in your life. I think so much of what happens when we're feeling stuck, when we're feeling like we repeat the same dang things over and over and over again, is a sense of disempowerment. Like we're a victim of circumstance in our life and we just can't get out of those ruts. So what I want to do is help you have what you need to step into making more self-empowered decisions. I am not the pop psychology, coach that's going to tell you, here are the 5 ways that you're going to. Now I have a 5-step process, but I'm not actually giving you the map. I am telling you how to make a map. I am telling you how to transcend some of the things that have been happening to you over the course of your life that have put you into these cycles where you're feeling stuck, where you're feeling like, oh, if I could just learn this lesson and not put myself through this again, right? So that is really what the Learn to Love Your Story entire premise is all about. And we're really going to dig in today on how you use story to pull yourself through that. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, but we're going to really dig into that today and talk about bucking the system, talking about like noticing when other stories for you really are getting in the way of you having a life that you want to live for you. All right. So first things first, right? Always, I'm going to just pull us up here on my laptop. Remember that at any point during the live, if you've joined me during my live talk, I will stop and answer comments, talk to comments. If you have examples from your own life and you want me to speak to those things, I would be more than happy. I love to have participation. So I'm just pulling that up right now. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Let's turn that off. That's annoying to hear my echo in the background. I thought I had that off. All right, so we're up, we're running. I can see anything that you're telling me, I think, on the comments. I missed a comment last time, and I think it came right at the end, and so I apologize to Heather, who weighed in saying that there was a lot of what we talked about yesterday that resonated with her. But remember, you can stop and you can comment at any time, and I can make this particular discussion more poignant for you, more directed at what it is that you want. So I have a Band-Aid today. I'm starting a project in my house. Oh boy, Natalie and her projects. I can't start. However, and wounded myself, but however, it actually brought up a good example. And so I just wanted to share with you. So I am middle child of 5 and only one that was remaining in Minnesota when both my parents passed away. There's 2 of us that are back here now. We grew up mostly here. We grew up here and in Texas, but for the 3 little kids, which I am the middle, and then there's 2 younger than me, we grew up mostly here. I got left with all the stuff. And so, that was a lot of stuff because my parents had a divorce. So it was, a household of stuff from a 5-kid family. It was a couple households of stuff. It was a lot of stuff, plus my own stuff. But I got left with the stuff because I was the last one here in Minnesota. And I think I have dwindled it down. Gosh, my mom has been gone 13 years this year, I think it was. 13 years, yeah. So I have dwindled it down to about, I think there's about 10 boxes in my garage, probably another 5 in one of my upstairs closets. And the 5 in my closets are bins filled with photographs, like photos from my oldest brother being little, photos from my grandma and, her family, like all the photos. These are boxes that you can't leave in the garage, and you also can't like just throw away, right? So raise your hand, tell me in the comments if you are one of these people that really struggles with these sentimental things. You struggle to know, like, what do I do with all of this stuff? Do I put it away? Do I just leave it in my closet? Can I throw it out? Who else will want these things? I've had a dream of scanning all of these things in, giving them to my siblings. I think I'm giving up on that dream. It costs too much money to have other people do it for me, and it costs me too much time to have me do it for myself. But this year, I have some photo projects that I'm going to be doing, which is part of what, wounded me today or yesterday. This time, I'm going to be putting together a photo project for my oldest son, who's turning 18, graduating from high school, kind of something that I've had in the works, or in my mind in the works, because there's still a lot of work to be done. But if you're one of these people like myself that really struggles with giving these items up, you can really start to drag those items along in your life. You keep throwing them into drawers, throwing them into closets, leaving them in the garage, and being frustrated every time you see them because they really just don't fit into the life that you have right now, right? So we're going to talk about today how there are constructs, there are stories that other people have told us that we should be, that operate in the same fashion. And the stories themselves are not bad things. I am not trying to say that, culture is bad, social conditioning is a bad thing, family, rules are bad things. They aren't. They help us. They save us some of the time, right? When we're being raised, they are the things that guide us. They're the boundaries around our life. And as we grow, age, and change, and certainly as we go through major life transitions, what seems to happen is that some of these rules just don't fit. Now, some of them are very painful and actually very damaging. And so we can get into that a little bit this afternoon, or this morning, this morning as well. However, some of them just are kind of like rocks and boxes that you're moving around, right? I have a story about rocks, but first. So this is the cup that I chose today. And I chose this cup today. So what it says is, for those of you that don't read backwards, you never know how strong you are until you're being strong is the only choice you have. Okay? Now, the reason I chose this cup today is strategic. I'm a life transition expert. So I have spent tons of hours across the couch from clients that find themselves in a position in a life transition where they no longer can really carry this stuff forward. Like, the narratives that people have given them, they're not only bogging them down, they're keeping them from moving forward entirely. And so they're gonna have to let some of that go. And what they need across the couch from me is some help understanding that they're strong enough to do that. Like, they can empower themselves to make those choices, to let go of those old narratives. They don't have to follow what society says, what religion says, what their family says, in the way that they believed that they had to up until that point. They, in fact, can, in a self-empowered way, make their own choices about what works for them, right? So I chose this because I think, unfortunately, this is the methodology by which we figure that out. We wait till that shit is so damn hard that we don't have any other choice, that we literally are so stuck that we can't even move an inch without letting go of some of the stories that other people have for us, about us, defining us. So then we sit across the couch from somebody, or we talk to, our friends and family, or just ultimately we figure out that we're strong enough to make those calls and move on. What I'd like to do with this particular, talk today, with this masterclass, is really help you understand, before that ever hits you, you could have a system in place where you're making self-empowered choices all the time, where you're pulling that stuff up and looking at it and saying, does this really serve me? And if it doesn't really serve you, to choose differently. And I have some different ways in which I tell people that they can do that and have that process in place. Now, of course, because everything I do is layered, self-awareness and self-compassion, or that compassionate self-awareness, as I call it, really is an integral part of making that happen. And if you don't have those two skills first, please go back to those first two masterclasses and look at how I discuss how those are integral parts of how you can make that happen. All right, so back to the rocks. Oh my God. I have a bit of a thing about moving, like a bit of PTSD even about moving. Can we talk about it? All right, so I've moved, let's see. I moved to Arizona with my first husband before we were married. We split up for a period of time, and this is where my PTSD and moving has, its origin story. And so my sister came, got all of my, I had moved all the things, like my whole apartment. I was in an apartment by myself, so I'd moved all my things. My sister came, got it, brought me back. I lived with my mom for a period of time. My first husband and I got back together, ended up getting married, moved into our own house, right? So here are my stuff. Some of the boxes that I had never were opened. Tell me in the comments, are you one of these people, like you've gone through more than multiple moves with a box that has not been opened? God, so many times this has happened to me. So I moved into that house, and we were married, had our baby, and shortly after, it was not in the cards for us to stay together. We're really actually good friends now, have raised a great 18-year-old. I love that little man. So no love lost here, but it's always a difficult time when that's happening. So we packed everything back up again. I lived with my sister for a while, and then she moved across country, and our mother was diagnosed with cancer. So I moved in with my mom when my son was young to help her for 3 years before she passed away. Then I moved into my own place. And then my sister decided to come back from where she was on the East Coast, and we moved in together for a period of time. And then I met my second husband, and then he moved in, and then we moved into our new place. And then I moved to the place that I am now after that marriage did not work for me. So several moves, several boxes that have been carried through moves not unopened. Like legit, I was in this place opening up bins that I guarantee you I had in that first apartment, because they were college textbooks, undergraduate college textbooks in these boxes. Oh my gosh. All right, that I hadn't opened up. So rocks though, let's get back to rocks. At some point in here, when my mom passed away, I took a lot of her landscaping rocks from her garden. She loved gardening. I hate gardening. I kill things. Like that's really, if it's not a perennial that can survive in the weather that I'm living, it will die. Like that is just a given. I try every year to have annuals in little pots, little flowers or whatever. I can't. I don't know. It's just not my thing. Anywho, I carried those rocks from a house that was just mine after she passed away, to the house where I shared with my sister, to the house where I shared with my second husband. And when I moved into this place, I don't have enough space for them, but we moved them yet again to my sister's garden. Legitimate rocks, landscaping rocks, like huge landscaping rocks. They were housed at a friend's house for a while. Like seriously, people, I have issues. I made people actually carry rocks around, but there is no better metaphor for how we carry around old stories in our minds and in our mind eye of who we are in this world than this idea of carrying rocks around from house to house, not serving me, right? Like I was having a really hard time letting go of some of this sentimental stuff, which in this case was legitimate rocks. And yet it wasn't serving me anymore. Okay. So here's what we talk about in the Learn to Love Your Story Bucking the System online course and what I teach people in my group coaching cohorts. There are a lot of things about how you were raised. There were a lot of things about what you learned growing up that made sense, that fit, and that were great boundaries. They were great things for you. That as you go through life transitions, you will find no longer need to be there. So they're not bad rules. There are some, we'll get there, but they aren't bad rules most of the time. They're just not serving you rules. And if we don't take the time to look at that stuff, and we don't take the time to grieve and move on from that stuff, and yes, you have to grieve things like the boxes that aren't going to come with you to the next house, or the landscaping rocks that aren't going to come with you to the next house, then they really start to weigh on us, like so heavily that it's hard to participate in the next parts of our lives, right? Really hard in some cases. So one of the best examples that I have that I can share with you now, many times, one of the places I go in this particular talk is to talk about social conditioning, things like body image and how that does not help you as you move through your life, right? Because your body ages, changes, and if the narrow body image of what society has for you doesn't fit you anymore, you start to really beat up on yourself. Ergo, go back to my first two talks about having that awareness and compassion for yourself as you make a self-empowered choice to say, you know what? My body's great. I'm 45. This is how it should look after 2 children and 45 years, going around the sun here on this earth. Usually that's where I go with this talk. Today, I'm going to take it a little bit more personal because I think while that idea makes sense to people, I want you to start to pick apart where this is showing up in your actual life. So I have a couple examples, but the first I'm going to talk about is being a single mom and divorcing twice. There is a lot of stories that our society has, that the faith traditions that I grew up in have, that just people in general have, about what it means when you've had 2 failed marriages, what it means when you're parenting by yourself versus when you're parenting in a partnership. And they're not good, people. A lot of judgment. And that judgment is something that really helped to frame for me when I was a young person that, this is not a thing to go into lightly. Going into a marriage, sharing your life with someone, sharing your household with someone, sharing parenting with someone is not something to go into lightly. The story itself is not a bad story. The story, though, when that stuff doesn't work, because hey, guess what? Divorce isn't something to go into lightly either. Single parenting isn't something to go into lightly either, right? Like, I don't need this idea now, this story that others tell me that there is somehow some more value to doing it in the married way than there is into doing it the divorced and single parent way. And in fact, as I move about in my life, if I hold that narrative, I'm beating myself up over and over and over and over, right? And it isn't until I notice that I can be strong enough to move past that it doesn't stop weighing on me, right? That is a double negative. It's a really bad way to say that. But this narrative will weigh on me if I don't let it go, if I don't notice that I'm strong enough to create self-empowered choices, self-empowered narratives that better serve me, right? And that is the journey that usually happens, as I referred to earlier. Like, I end up with people across the couch from me during major life transitions when they finally recognize that this old narrative that they've been carrying around is leading to self-judgment that then leads to that cycle that we talked about in my talk yesterday on compassion. The stories that we end up then telling ourselves. I'm, a piece of crap. what's wrong with me that I couldn't stay in that marriage? What's wrong with me that I keep getting married to these kind of people? That doesn't work for me. What's wrong with me that nobody wants to co-parent with me? That isn't actually true. As I said, I have good relationships with my kids' dad. So kids as dads. Cause I have 2 baby daddies, cause that's just how I roll. Right. So I would say that this is where that stuff really starts to weigh in on you. And we could go down the road of talking about it specifically, how it's shown up as a divorcee. However, I think that the narrative that really exemplifies this much better for me is the one that I chose, how I chose my career. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been doing that for 2 decades. Doing this kind of stuff, teaching and educating is a newer arm where I use that clinical wisdom, but I'm also incorporating my own personal life wisdom into that. But as a clinical psychologist, I've done thousands and thousands of hours of therapy with people, thousands. And I never thought that's what I was going to do. Guess what I thought I was going to do? I went to school pre-med. I thought, I'll be like a gynecologist and, work with women having babies. Maybe I'll be a pediatrician. I don't know. Like, I had ideas in my head about going to medical school that were dashed with general chemistry my freshman year in college. Just because, well, first of all, I made a poor choice by going to the 7 a.m. general lecture. What was I thinking? Like, I'm 19. It's the first time I'm living on my own. I don't have to be up at 7 in the morning, and that's the choice. Oh, whatever. I legitimately, I've thrown them away since then. Several moves later, as you saw earlier in the this talk. But I saw some notes from that particular class I was looking through. Clearly, I would fall asleep writing, gibberish, squiggles, had no idea. No wonder this was the most tough class that I'd ever had. It was the first C I ever got, in my entire life ever got. And I was like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing this. So I shifted at that point into psychology. I do psychological principles. I just had not thought I was going to go down that road. I had a different idea. But what I've learned is that idea was not my idea. That was another person's story for me. And in this case, it was my dad's story for me. My dad was very much into achievement-oriented parenting. Not a bad thing, right? This is not a bad thing to do with your kids at all. He was a good guy. He wanted all of us to be the best of what we could be. And I was his smart kid. And he wanted me to take that smartness and do one of these quintessential stories that others told him were the best things to do. You got to be a doctor. You got to be a lawyer. You got to be an engineer. I hate math, so that wasn't happening. So he had this idea for me that I was going to be a doctor. So when I flipped to psychology, the story behind the story really guided that process. Now, there were elements to it that I liked, but I needed to be a doctor. That's what happened. I switched from this kind of medical doctor. I needed to find another doctorate, essentially, that was legitimate to my family, my father in particular, and to feed that story that others had for me about what it meant to be accomplished if this smart little kid who went off to college was going to do the right thing by herself. Now, without self-awareness, that's the first masterclass. I didn't know any of that stuff was going down. I really didn't. I thought I was living up to my own story, and I knew that I needed to do these things, but I didn't realize how much of that story was entrenched in somebody else's stories for me. And even, because it was my dad's story for me, even the stories that other people had told him he should have for his kids, right? There's layers to this, people. And none of that was going to serve me when I started in my career. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of that completely again because I talked about that in my first masterclass at length. But you can see how these two things dovetailed together. That I felt driven to be a doctor really had little to do with what I wanted to be. Now, I am so happy that I ended up in the job that I did, and I enjoy what I do for a living now. Now that other narrative that I wasn't aware of pleasing others and taking care of others, also was uncovered, so that I could let that go and make more self-empowered choices. But here's the key. This is what bucking the system is all about. It's that once you notice that this is a narrative, then you make choices for yourself. You don't get bogged down in the self-judgment. You use that compassionate awareness to show up for yourself and say, yeah, that doesn't work for me. I'm going to have to shift this. It's going to have to be a job that is something that I want for me. No longer am I just going to be, in a room full of people that are older than me, male mostly, and do the supervisor thing. Like, that's not working for me. No longer am I going to be the one that puts the rubber to the road for supervisors and managers and directors that want these huge things happening in their programs, which I have the smarts to do, but never really got the credibility, the credit for. I never really was acknowledged as the one that was doing that, yet I was killing myself, right? So then I switched into group practice, but even there, I was picking up on other people's, this is what they wanted for their business, and look at how awesome I am because I can do it over here. Yeah, none of that was serving me. And once I figured out with compassionate awareness that's what was happening, I stepped into my own practice. And even within that, once I figured out, like, Dr. Natalie didn't have to look a certain way, that I could put stuff out on YouTube, right? That I could have master classes and teach people things that they really need to hear. I don't have to have you come in my office across the couch for me to share my clinical wisdom, my personal wisdom. And that is why Learn to Love Your Story was born. It is a hub. It's a hub for people to find the kind of clinical caliber knowledge they need to transcend old patterns in their life, to transcend where they feel stuck, where they're carrying a box of rocks from one house to another for themselves. That stuff isn't serving you. So let's talk a little bit about how to do this. I'm just checking it out. Oh, so many boxes in your life, Denise. I feel it. I feel it. Literally, I carried rocks from home to home. I can't. It's the best story ever. That is like, people must hate me in my, I have friends and family that love me like nobody's business, because who the hell carries hundreds of pounds of landscaping rocks? Big rocks, not like little rocks like you could get another bag of it, Natalie, at the new place. It was like my mom had like these big landscaping rocks. And my memory of it is they were in my house in Texas, and I think they carried them up to Minnesota. Not all of them, but some of them. And then she would put them around like a little landscaping area where she would plant. Oh, she was so good at planting, and I was so good at killing things. Still am so good at killing things. I might, it's possible at some point in my life I'll figure out how to kill a fake plant. I don't lie. I think it's possible that I could do it. Other people are like, what is she talking about? I don't know. I have a brown thumb. What are you going to do? All right. So in my online course, I break this into 4 different sections. We start by, talking about what programming, conditioning, social conditioning, family conditioning, just kind of what's the book of rules of life that's underneath, why we do what we do, that really kind of, it doesn't always serve us when we go forward. So we talk about things like, those big stories that people have for us. This is what your body should look like. This is what beauty means. This is what success is. This is what, right? So there's multiple levels at which that is happening. There's societal, cultural ones. There is, kind of familial ones. A big group of this is your spiritual or faith traditions, have a large impact on basically what your book of rules are. And these are, close that up. These are the unsaid rules. These are the rules that people have for themselves, but don't tell themselves that they have for themselves. I'm just going to turn this light off. Sorry. I hope that you guys can see me, but I just realized my battery is a little low. We don't want this to turn off. So there's several genres of where that comes. That's the first place. So we've already kind of covered that. So the second place that I start to teach people about this is really in looking at how do you shift out of that. So story is really the vehicle by which I teach that. Remember yesterday when we were talking, I really talk about how the ideas of how we talk about things, we talk about in story. Like if I define something for you, it's not really relevant. But if I tell you a story about how that happens, then it becomes really relevant, right? I'm just looking, Denise. Oh yeah, totally. Stories. And I have so many. So I want you to remember, this is how marketers do stuff. Like they're not selling you a product, they're selling you a story about how that product will help you, right? So healing and our traditions around healing really started with, talk therapy is no brand new thing. We used to sit around a fire, right? We used to have difficult things happen to us, and we would talk about that story over and over and over. Oral tradition was originally how we would pass down things from one generation to another and in many ways still do. Like some stuff gets written down, yes, and some stuff doesn't. Sometimes there's just more of an oral tradition in your family about how things work and don't work, right? So, all right. So we're, working within this idea of story, and I'll talk to people about there is a way in your life to take on the narrator, the author, the hero in your story, the characters in your story. We cannot rewrite history, but we can rewrite the landscape of that story. We can rewrite the narration of that story. We can re-emphasize this part instead of this part of that story. So we really get into this idea of, even within the framework of a story that has passed down, or something you've done in your life that you really feel horrible about, you can reframe it in a different way. You can re-narrate it in a different way. You can put emphasis or highlight different areas of that for yourself that help you wrap your whole brain around it. Now, self-compassion is one of the biggest tools that I teach about how to do that. And that's all of what we talked about yesterday. Self-compassion is really having that view of your life where you are looking at it more realistically, trying to be kind and understanding about why you did what you did when you did it. So instead of telling yourself a story, as I could with my story about my career, I was not smart enough to do chemistry. I was not smart enough to get through that. So I had to go into this other field that was lesser than. That's a story that won't serve me. I mean, how excited am I going to be about getting up in the morning about my job if what I've been telling myself across time is it was my second choice? It was the runner-up. That was a story my dad had for me, though, for a long time. And it was something that I wrestled with. Like, I chose the lesser career, and so I was going to have to overprove myself in this career in order for me to feel good about myself. Ugh, right? Like, that is not going to work, people. It's not going to work. So I really had to shift into a different way of thinking about it altogether. I had to know that this was the choice that was my choice, that it was a better fit, that what I realized is that the narrative behind being a doctor for smart people was a narrative that didn't serve me, right? And so, yes, it's my second choice. That was a choice I empowered myself into, not one I settled myself into. Do you see the distinction? The history is still the same. I still had general chemistry at 7 a.m. and got a C my freshman year in college. And that was kind of a choice, like a wake up call. This is not going to work for me. But instead of it being, and then I settled, it now in my mind is, and then I really aligned myself with things that were more important to me, that made more sense to me. I hope that that's making sense for you. So we'll talk about how story and the different ways of getting into your own story and re-narrating it, re-authoring some, parts of it so that you're highlighting different things or re-spinning different things is one of the ways in which we learn to love our stories, right? And loving our stories really helps us empower ourselves. I don't have to like every element of what happened to me. Do I like that I got up at 7 in the morning and slept through chemistry and then got a C? No, I don't. Like, there's no part of that I actually enjoy. It's funny now, 20 some years. Oh God, it's 20 some years later. Yep, I was in college over 20 years ago. Whoop, whoop. Oh my God. Sometimes when you say those things out loud and hear them, you're like, whoa, how did that happen? But I know, while I don't like that part of my story, I love it. I love that I was able to journey through that and discover that. And gosh, I really love that happened to me my freshman year in college, and I've been across the couch from people that talk to me about things they didn't discover until their 40s. There's things about me that I didn't discover until my 40s. And I hope to continue to compassionately be self-aware about things that don't work for me into my 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. Yes, I would like to hold my great-grandchildren. So I would say that this narrative approach is really the heart of what we do in that transcendence of the programming and conditioning that we've had, right? And then I want you to really use the power of your story. And I also talked about this at the end of self-compassion, so it's no surprise that it shows up again here. The stories that we tell ourselves and the stories others tell us impact us negatively, sometimes really negatively. Sometimes we're carrying around a weight that never should have been given to us in the first place, right? So one of my favorite, and I'm going to butcher it, one of my favorite Carl Jung quotes, grandfather of clinical psychology, is that the burden, one of the greatest burdens for a child is the unlived life of a parent. Anybody? Yeah, that one's really profound, and that one shows up over and over and over for so many of us. So my dad was a chronic alcoholic that eventually passed away from the result of his alcoholism, right? My mom was an alcoholic that recovered. My dad never recovered. My mom stayed very codependent, and so there's all sorts of history there that impacted all 5 of us as kids of theirs. Differently, right? Differently. 2 hands up. I hear you, Denise. So there is this unlived life that my dad must have had that went into some of these narratives that he gave us. He was achievement oriented. He pressured all 5 of us, and many of us were burdened with that in different ways. My brother became, I think, what was he? He was a colonel in the Army by the time he retired. He's in a 2nd career now. My sister was like one of the chief, managers in a company that my dad was a director or vice president of marketing and sales for. None of that was good enough. I went from MD to psychologist, and none of that was good enough. But the real narrative here is that his life didn't feel good enough, and he was pressuring his children to succeed, hoping that was going to be the thing, right? Another place that I see these narratives that don't serve us show up is in our belief systems, like our faith traditions, or even just cultural narratives that tell us that good enough looks like things in this box. And anytime you're falling outside of the box, you're feeling not good enough. And yet the problem is not where you are. The problem is the constraint of the box and letting that go. And narrative is a real beautiful way to do that, because as we age, we can expand the boundaries of what's inside our boxes. We love boxes, people. Don't give up the boxes. We love stories. We love narratives. We love to have a way to explain things. That is our cognitive brain, our thinking brain that just like scans our environment and wants to be able to make a story of it. Yes. And you're number 3 too, Denise? Well, yeah, You and I, we're soul sisters. We're soul sisters. But yeah, so narrative really is this beautiful way, I think, of helping all of us really get into re-looking and expanding the boundaries, right? So if the narrative of my faith tradition is you marry once and you stay married, that's a beautiful narrative that guides children to be very, focused on finding a partner in their young adulthood. That's somebody that they can go the distance with. It's not something to go into lightly. That narrative isn't actually a bad thing. What happens is if you divorce because that didn't work out, then the narrative is you've somehow failed. That's not what's happening here. Just like when I chose to become a psychologist, it wasn't because that I had to settle. It was because I became more aligned with what I needed. When we make that hard decision that a marriage doesn't work, so that we're going to have to co-parent in two separate households, this is not an easy decision, but it is many times a decision that we make because it is the best decision, and we have to open up our box to be able to re-narrate what that means to us. So narrating, reframing our stories, and then telling our stories becomes a very powerful thing. I wrote a blog a zillion years ago. No, it's not a zillion years ago. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but essentially what I was talking about is that we can connect with one another through story quicker than we can through, really any other means. And that our suffering stories in particular are the things that connect us in our tribes. So I experienced helping my mother through cancer, and cancer is the worst. All of them, they're the worst. They deteriorate somebody's body over time. They deteriorate somebody's emotional wellness over time because you watch your body keep decompensating and you have to grieve that while also facing death. It's a really devastating disease for any stretch, right? And lots of people survive and recover and great, but many people die. And my mother was one of them. So she lived 3 years. We thought she'd only live about a year and a half, I think is what they said. Like 18 months was what they gave her at first, or 19 months or something like that, some weird number. So we felt blessed. We got borrowed time with her. However, it was a devastating thing. It was a devastating thing to watch her walk through and to help her walk through. And I know that at the end of her life, she was looking at things from the lens of regret, through the lens of what she hadn't done, what she wished she would have done. And I've watched that even across the couch with some people that I've been able to help carry into end stages of their life. This is not a productive way to go back and look at what happened in your life. It is, however, how we're wired to go back and look at our life. What went wrong? What didn't I do well? How can I pivot? But you can't pivot when you're at the end of your life, right? You can only move forward, or you can only, at the end of your life, look at things from the direction of what went well, what didn't go well, what did I love, what didn't I love, and balance that as a whole in a compassionate lens, or you're just going to keep re-injuring yourself, right? So owning our stories is a powerful thing, and then sharing that with people is a powerful connective tissue. So another thing that we do when we let go of other people's stories for us is we are able to connect with them on a different, more powerful level. And that is one of the things that we are wired to do most, is to be in community and to be connected with one another, right? So I can tell the story of how I watched that happen with my mom, and other people identify with that. Maybe they identify with me in the story and how hard that journey was for me and how hard a journey is for them. And now we're soul sisters, right? Denise, all you had to say is I'm the middle of 5 kids. And what happened? I'm your soul sister, right? Like I feel in connection with you. So I have a map in my mind of what that means. You have a map in your mind of what that means, and we connect. But sometimes when I share that story, it connects with the people who have cancer or who are struggling in some way. And they hear the part of the story that's like, I don't want to die that way. I don't want to die in my regret. And I can't stop that I'm in this battle with a terminal illness. So I'm going to have to stop holding myself accountable to other people's stories of how my life should have been, right? Right. So this is the power of our own narratives and sharing our own narratives and becoming in connection with one another with our own narratives. And then I really just talk about how you use this model over rinse, repeat, as a way to really live into your story and love your story. Loving your story being the key here. You don't have to like it. You don't have to be happy about choices you've made from your past. But if you are able to kind of keep in mind that this box that you put yourself in can ever expand, that the boundaries of who you are and what that means to you can expand over the course of your life, that's a key factor in really learning to love your story and in really learning to love your life again, right? Right. This is some powerful stuff. So my Bucking the System online course speaks to this. And my group coaching, really, we can dive into this. I love diving into this with women in their midlife because I think that women in midlife, this is the phenomena. Like we've hit a place at which our social currency no longer works. And we're faced with either misery, sitting in that, resentful and gross, or learning how strong we are, empowering ourselves to make self-empowered choices that really help us transcend these narratives that no longer serve us, right? The narratives that just are like a box of rocks that we're carrying from one phase of our life into the next. Yet our body's deteriorating and not as strong and not able to handle it as well anymore. And sometimes we just have to give away things that even for a long time really served us and sentimentally we're really attached to, but this part of our life doesn't make space for. Like sentimentally, I'm really attached to those pictures that I need to go through for my family. And it doesn't serve me to keep carrying that box to another house and another house and another house. I need to figure out and expand my box of what that means, because throwing away pictures being a bad thing doesn't serve me. I'll keep carrying them with me, but I'm also not honoring or valuing them in a way that Marie Kondo would have us honor and value them in. So yeah, so beautiful, isn't it, Denise? Yeah. It's just, loving our stories is the key. It's the key to expanding how we move about in our worlds. Because if you lug a story with you, if you resent a story, but you can't rewrite your history, man, that's a burden that takes up space in your new part of your life. That means something else can't take up that space. Some other joy, some other happiness, some other piece of contentment can't take up space, right? I've talked about this in many of my talks. I don't know if I have this week in our masterclass, but we have a plate. Our life is this plate, and only so much will fit on that plate at any given time. And either we're making self-empowered choices that choose what's on that plate, or the plate decides for us because its edges just have stuff drop off, whether we want it to or not, right? I hope that you are really enjoying this, how this kind of all comes together from compassion, from self-awareness, so compassionate self-awareness into really learning to let go of other people's stories for us and learn to love our own story. Now, tomorrow, what we're really going to focus on is the self-care piece of this. And self-care, I'm going to blow your mind with thinking about self-care in a whole different way. I work with women in midlife. Women in midlife don't want to give up their caretaking. That's one of the major cornerstones of their self-worth and how they think about themselves in the world. They love their people. They love their tribes. They love their communities, families, workplaces. They are the caretakers in those places. And if I try to tell them to be some sort of selfish, just take care of yourself person, it will not resonate at all. So instead, how I spin this is that self-care itself is one of the most selfless acts that you do. It's one of the hardest, most effortful acts that you do for your self-care or for your others' care, right? Because if you're not taking care of the vessel that takes care of the things, what? None of the things get taken care of. You actually take away from taking care of your things. This plate analogy that I just referred to, this will come up tomorrow because it's definitely something that we dig into as we talk about self-care. And my program online course for the self-care is selfish is the new selfless. Selfish being kind of I'm playing on this program or story that others have told us, right? About what self-care is, that it's a selfish thing, that we're taking time away from the people in our life that we care for. But it's actually the most selfless thing that we can do by doing it and doing it well. And it's a mindset shift. It is not like getting your nails done and having a massage or having a girls' night out. Those are acts that might fit into a self-care category for somebody, but they might not fit in for everybody. So I don't talk about the things so much as I talk about the mindset and how we can shift and how important this is to our work and learning to love our stories, right? I hope you enjoyed today. Thank you, Denise. I hope that you are taking everything in. As you know, I have these on our Take Back Your Life masterclass, all of these videos. They'll be here till January 31st. Please like, follow, and share things because I can't reach the people that need this message if you're not helping me to do that. I don't know all the people. You know people, sorry. My battery is going, so it's a good time to close. But yeah, please like, share, and follow because that really helps to get this message out to more people. And that is really what my passion is here. So all of this stuff will live in the Take Back Your Life Masterclass. People can sign up by going to learntoloveyourstory.com/masterclass. I also have a link for that here in our masterclass discussion posts because that is where I'm housing these videos until January 31st. So they'll be in the masterclass on Facebook, but they also are online. So when people go to register to be part of this masterclass, they don't miss what they missed on Friday and Saturday and then today. So please share this information because I want to get this free stuff out there for people. I really want people to start to be able to learn to love their stories, especially during COVID and how heavy all of this change fatigue is on all of us. This is just, I think, a necessary thing that all of us need right now, right? All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central Time, we are going to be talking about that self-care, that selfish is the new selfless. I'll be helping you with some tips on how you can employ that new mindset in your life right now, right? We can all use it. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you tomorrow.